Okay, I'm back. So the working group Sustainable Publishing of Metadata, our working group started in 2016. It was a workshop with the workshop of Veerle van den Dalen. I think Mike was also there. It started, in fact, with our colleagues of the CG SOMA in the context of EHRI. And then at that moment, we decided the CG SOMA joined the State Archives and to create a working group, the working group Sustainable Publishing of Metadata. I can't, okay. What's the working group about? The working group Sustainable Publishing of Metadata, what's in the name? So it's metadata. It started with archival catalogs. So the metadata is the central point of our working group. So, and we try to link collection holdings, institutions, researchers, and virtual research environments with metadata, because we see that each partner has its needs, and we try to combine them to bring them together within this working group. As you see, we have many collection holding institutions within our working group. As a virtual research environment, we dispose over a broad network. So we are looking to the European Open Science Cloud. Archives Portal Europe is shining. One moment, please. Okay, I am back. Sorry for this. There is Archives Portal Europe. We have links with EHRI infrastructure. We have links with DISCO and with Europeana, with CESDA, and with EHRI. So we are trying to combine the expertise of these infrastructures within our working group, and as universities and research institutions with members, we have also the links with the researchers. With our working group, we try to go into opportunities. We look into new technologies to offer for researchers. We saw also that there has never been so much data and metadata available, and our aim is to maximize the use of these opportunities by bringing together an international expertise from the networks I mentioned. So the focus of the working group is on cooperation. So what we do is knowledge exchange. We see that within EHRI, within Archives Portal Europe, within DISCO, within DARIAH, we have the same problems. We all face the same difficulties seen from our own research background and perspective. So, and the goal of the working group is on thinking about solutions for these same problems. If we can have a solution within EHRI, so we can share it with the working group, and Archives Portal Europe can, for example, use it or use the expertise of EHRI and vice versa. Then we saw also that there is also a leverage between cooperation and competition. So we see that resources and staff are a scarce commodity and are also distributed between research infrastructures and instances. This means there is also a little bit competition. We see it with, for example, within Belgium, the federal scientific institutions, if they file for money, they have to go for a call, for example, they have to go into competition. These are the house rules. So it's the same within on the European level within infrastructures, but it can be healthy. So we have to do it on a healthy way, and we have to be aware that collaboration is essential, and certainly the sharing of knowledge and know-how without losing sight, of course, of the individual interests of our own institutions. So it's political. Our working group is political. But it's important to walk on that line and keep in mind that cooperation is always better than doing things in their own back garden. Then the field of collaboration, we have three main teams. So the teams, we developed them during a workshop, and some of us were on this workshop. And these are also the three teams we keep using. We use a metadata path to standardization. So it concerns specific challenges regarding sustainable archiving and the availability of information, such as the use and implementation of international standards. There is also a second theme, is the link between metadata and society. So we focus on new opportunities and challenges arising in digital society. For example, the GDPR rules, the EIDAS regulations, and so on. And there is also, with regarding to metadata, communication and interoperability. So there is also it's the communication between archive institutions, researchers, and research infrastructures. And this can be on the technological level, but also on researchers' expectations and options. So it's a very broad theme. And we see when we have projects, we can put them into one of more of these themes. I don't give a list of all our activities, but it's important to mention some of them so that you can see for the people who don't know our working group, the scope of the working group. So we have to bring together and communicate about knowledge, hands-on expertise, and tools concerning sustainable digital publishing of metadata. So there was also a publication. It was the publication, for example, of the EHRI workshop in 2016. We offer tools for self-analysis. This is, for example, the Madeleine project. It was a project shared with our colleagues from the Royal Library and the CG Soma. It was an analysis about the expectations of researchers of our institutions. So there are reports, and we want certainly share them. We want to integrate experience from research infrastructures, EHRI Europeana, Archives Portal Europe, CESDA. This was a workshop that with the name of trust, this subject was covered by a workshop, Trust and Understanding, within the Belgian State Archives. You see it it was in 2017 and 2018. We are involved, were involved and are involved into the Promise project. It was a project for archiving the Belgian web. It was a joint project between KBR and the Belgian State Archives. Now the sustainability of the platform will be done by our colleagues of the Royal Library. So these are a few of the activities our working group is involved in. As current projects, we are in research data management. It's a joint project, a DARIAH-CISDA project. As in effect, we were the first to combine on a local level both infrastructures in a project for developing a research infrastructure for the social sciences and digital humanities. We started with CESDA and then joined DARIAH. It's called the SODA project, the Social Sciences and Data and Humanities Archive. Then we have at this moment running a new project. It's Super. It's a sustainable public electronic repository. It's in fact an add-on for the SODA project. So we will go wider and maybe we will have, but it depends on financing, also a SODA Plus, so that we can even extend our repository to the positive sciences. Then on the level of DARIAH-VL, I see the colleagues of the Royal Library, for example, they filed a project of which Julie will tell you more. We are also covering the new archival standards, the RIC standards. So we are also already internally developing something, but also looking for further financing. There is the further development of EHRI, of which Doreen will tell you more. So we also, the agenda of our working group is made by opportunities we see. So this is also when people who want to join our working group, if you have interesting projects, certainly let us know. This working group can be a platform for you to disseminate, to talk about, to communicate about running projects. So this is in fact an invitation. I just give you the example of our social sciences and digital humanities archive as it is now. Our working group has also a blog in a hypothesis. The blog existed only from last year, so we have to do a little bit work. Our recent developments are mentioned in the blog, but the aim is to go further and back in time with older presentations, so that everyone can have a view about our activities. And also a second invitation of us today is, please, if you want to communicate within Metadata, if you think my project is something we can that fits within the DARIAH working group to sustainable publishing of metadata, please contact us and we can certainly publish your articles or presentation on the blog. So this is it for me at this moment. I give the word to Oliver. He will enlighten us about the legal aspects of research data management. We noticed that it was, we thought when we started that it was rather simple, but we noticed that it is a very complicated task. Oliver will enlighten us about that. Oliver, I give you the word. I stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to share it. I had some slides prepared. So there we are. So what I'll try to do in the next 5 to 10 minutes is give you an overview of some legal governance issues relating to the SODA project. But to start, maybe we should begin by explaining what exactly is the SODA platform. Johan already mentioned it shortly, but I put some elements which characterize the SODA platform here on the slide. So the SODA platform is the Federal Belgian Data Archive for Social Science and Digital Humanities. And what does it do? You can find on the website and deposit on the website research data relating to social science and digital humanities. And the SODA platform in turn promotes those data for reuse and offers them and safely preserves them in the long term. And specifically, what specifically characterizes the SODA platform is that it is set up within the Belgian State Archives, which is a feature which is pretty important if you would envisage to set up such a platform. I'll come back to that later. So that's in short the definition of the SODA platform. So the format I've been given here is a bit too short to explain everything in detail, so I'll provide some bottlenecks and some pointers on how we specifically dealt with some issues, and I would like to deal with 4 issues. The first issue is the scope of the data, the open data rules, because the research data of the SODA platform is an open data platform, and the data on the platform are research data, which is something different, of course, than government data. And research data, since shortly, are covered by the second PSI directive. So that allows or enables the platform actually to offer them for reuse. The data is not yet implemented in Belgian law, as probably in many European countries. So that means that the SODA platform is in a way some kind of a pioneer on this topic. But that said, at the same time, the Belgian archive law, like many archive laws in Europe, probably allow, in fact, allowed access to private documents like research data, provided a specific procedure of appraisal, selection, and transfer is followed, so as to enable the managers of the platform to determine whether private documents qualify for archiving. So that means basically that even if the open data platform, even if the PSI directives are not yet implemented, open data platforms set up within the context of a state archive could perfectly function nowadays. So that's a transitional solution, actually. That brings me to the privacy issues, and there are three dimensions to the privacy issues. The first is, of course, the nature of the research data. Research data contain a lot of surveys and interviews, which in turn contain a lot of sensitive data. So the SODA platform is very sensitive for privacy issues, in fact. So that means, that brings me in fact to the scope, to the rules that apply, the GDPR rules that apply. You have on a European perspective, on a European level, the GDPR rules, and on a Belgian perspective, the Belgian privacy law, which implements the GDPR rules. And the twofold level is important because often national laws apply stricter rules than the rules that are put in the GDPR regulation. So it's important to stress. I'll come back to that later as well. So the rules, which rules apply? Of course, the scope of application. As a lawyer, we always make the difference between the application personae, the application materiae, and the application temporae. So in terms of a person's applies, in terms of the persons, GDPR rules apply as from the moment living natural persons are involved, which is of course the case on the SODA platform, as the platform relates to data of identifiable persons often. The second scope of application is the application materiae. There, the GDPR rules apply once there is a question of processing activities. What the SODA platform does is actually collecting data, storing them, and making them available to third parties, which are three typical processing activities within this context of the GDPR rules. So that is also available. And then the more important, more difficult and important is the application temporae, which is a question of the retroactive application of GDPR rules, because GDPR rules have been evolved over time. So the question is whether future consequences of scenarios which emerged under previous GDPR rules, how should they be dealt with? Do the new rules apply, or should processing be based on the previous rules? There, at least in civil law jurisdictions, the rule is that the new GDPR rules will apply to those scenarios which emerged in the past, unless there are definitive acquired rights. And what does it mean? That means that you have to make the difference between the collecting activity and the processing activity. So in terms of the collecting activity, the previous rules will apply, because those are definitive acquired rights. But in terms of the processing activities, the new GDPR rules or privacy rules will most often apply. That can, again, this can be different. The solution can be different according to the country in which you're located. But that's at least the case in Belgium. So that brings me to the question: how are these privacy rules implemented on the SODA platform? And in order for to have a good implementation methods, everyone has to start in principle by making the difference between who is the processor and who is the controller. The controller under GDPR rules is the one who has the control over the activity and bears the liability in case of an infringement of GDPR rules. The choice has been made in the SODA platform to make SODA a processor, because the platform actually merely storage and hosts activities. So it's function more or less like a call center. And the depositor, which is the scientist or the university to which he belongs, is a controller, because he determines how and to whom the data will be offered for reuse. How is the question under which license? Is that if the depositor is also the author of the research data, he has to decide which license he applies to offer the data for reuse, and that is the choice. We have the choice between the Creative Commons licenses. There, the SODA platform decided to choose for the CC BY license, mainly because of legal restraints in Belgium, which do not allow to waive all moral rights relating to IP rights. But that again might differ in other countries and definitely in common law jurisdictions. How or to whom the data are offered for reuse depends on the legal basis that applies to the processing actually. And the legal basis is quite complicated, but the most important legal basis, of course, is the consent requirement. So if the scientists obtained consent from the individuals whose data are being processed, then the data can be offered for reuse, and then offered for reuse both to commercial reusers as to non-commercial reusers. Of course, the platform is merely is basically today intended as a peer-to-peer platform, so it offers data for reuse to other scientists, and often consent is not available. So that brings us to the question: can we then offer them for reuse under another legal basis? And the GDPR rules offer here the solution, an exception-based solution for scientific reuse. The scientific reuse is specifically mentioned as a legal basis, provided that the data are anonymized or pseudonymized, unless the anonymization or unless the scientist can prove that he actually needs the data relating to the natural persons. And then in Belgium, there is even more discussion, because the data cannot be put for reuse non-anonymized unless there is a warranty that they can only be reproduced handwritten, which means basically that we can only offer them under the scientific reuse exception in a safe room environment. But the safe room environment conflicts, in fact, with the software on which the platform runs, because the software, which is the Dataverse software, is only let's say suitable for online downloads, and online downloads conflict, of course, with the safe room environment. So that brought us to the question: can we not use yet another legal basis? And there, the fact that the SODA platform is set up within the state archives offers the possibility to rely on the archives exception. And the archive exception allows us actually to deposit, or let's say that if you deposit data on the long term for archiving purposes, the GDPR rules allow that those data are deposited non-anonymized. And if we deposit the data for archiving purposes non-anonymized and put them on a separate server than the Dataverse software, we can provide access to those non-anonymized versions to scientists, but also non-scientists, provided that the transfer to the separate server is based on selection, appraisal, and transfer procedure, which is required for archiving deposits. So basically, in summary, there are three legal bases. The most important one is consent, but consent is often not available. So then the second one is scientific reuse, which has the fallback that it cannot that the data should be deposited anonymized. So to counter that element, we have decided to apply the archives exception, and we offer now data sets, two data sets, one on a separate server, so it can be accessed in a safe room environment, non-anonymized, and one on the Dataverse software within the SODA platform, where it can be accessed anonymized by scientists. That's more or less the way it functions, the legal base function, the legal basis functions for the in the context of the SODA platform. That's what we dealt with. Then the next issue is of course the copyright issue, which is often a case because research data are copyright protected. If the author is if the depositor is the author of the data, he should offer them for reuse through specific licenses. But often the author or the depositor of the data is not the author, and in that case, the platform can benefit from the heritage exception under the Copyright Directive, which allows the platform to reproduce and communicate to the public IP protected materials. Of course, there is only a possibility for open data platforms which are set up within heritage organizations like state archives. So if you set up data platforms not embedded in heritage organizations, you always need to conduct an IP due diligence to see if you have consent from the author, if the author is not the same as the depositor. So how do you deal with it? How do we deal with it within the SODA platform? We have specific terms and conditions in which we have inserted specific hold harmless clauses to make sure that any liability is upon the depositor. Maybe finally, the heritage exception under the Copyright Directive is of course a solution, but the problem with in the current state of affairs, let's say, the Copyright Directive only applies to does not cover online downloads, which is also a problem for open data platforms. So online downloads are not covered by the current but are covered by the new Copyright Directive. So it's just merely a question of waiting the implementation into national laws in order to benefit entirely from this heritage exception. And then finally, a couple of issues relating to antitrust. In general, antitrust rules will probably not apply if the platform is set up within a state archive. Why? Because the platform is not an undertaking within the meaning of the European competition laws. So the typical claim that is then made, a refusal to supply data to certain parties, cannot be made because the application conditions are not fulfilled. But the problem is that in the open data rules, certain of these antitrust notions are embedded. So even though under the normal antitrust rules, antitrust claims are very difficult, the open data rules recuperate actually some of these notions, and they should be complied with. I have mentioned two notions. The most important one is exclusivity. So what should not be done is to grant exclusivity to certain reusers unless these exclusivity are objectively justified. So what happens, for example, in state archives, is that digitalization work is being subcontracted to third parties, and in return for their digitalization efforts, these third parties receive then some kind of an exclusivity for a couple of years to use those data. So that is an objectively justified processing, and that would not qualify under the prohibition of exclusivity under the open data rules. But of course, you should be careful when assessing those exclusivities. And the second one is no discrimination, which means that if government or government institutions like state archives, and at the same time the data platforms operating within those state archives, if they use their own data for other activities, for commercial purposes, then the conditions to whom under which those data are offered should be the same as the conditions that apply to other third parties. So that is a non-discrimination criterion. So that's in a nutshell what I wanted to say. And I'll give the word back to Johan or someone from the hosting team. Thank you.
I will take back. I will. Okay, I take back. I will share my screen. So thank you, Oliver, for this presentation. So it's quite interesting. In fact, all these. The interference of all these legal issues and laws and regulations, and to find a solution. I now have, I give the word to Tom. As you know, Belgium is a complicated country, which makes it also interesting. Sometimes this means we have DARIAH-BE, and then we have 3 entities, and we have the DARIAH Wallonie-Bruxelles, we have DARIAH-VL on the federal level, of which I'm coordinator, and then we have DARIAH Flanders, which is cooperating with CLARIAH. So it's quite complicated. We all 3 have links with funding institutions and so on. It makes it yes, quite interesting. So I give the word to Tom. He will tell us about the things which are going on in Flanders. Tom, please.
Thank you, Johan. And can you share or start sharing the presentation as well?
Yes.
And I will try to keep this short so that Julie can immediately take over with one of the examples of collaboration between different institutions that participate in CLARIAH Flanders. So I will
just lost.
I will already start while Johan is setting up the presentation by briefly explaining the title. So in this presentation, I will introduce you to CLARIAH-VL, as it's called, and the VL stands for Vlaanderen or Flanders in English. That is a new open humanities service infrastructure set up in Flanders. And I will do that by briefly walking you through its history, and then by focusing on some of the major infrastructural challenges that we intend to address as a research infrastructure. And yeah, what we aim, as the title says, is to stimulate, but also to advance digitally enabled research in the arts and humanities. So not only in Flanders or even Belgium, but also beyond. And then I will end this very short presentation by introducing you to some of the services that we will develop to actually address these infrastructural challenges. So next slide, please, Johan. What we have decided a couple of years ago already was to join forces and to synergize the contributions of both pan-European research infrastructures, CLARIAH and DARIAH. I don't think it is necessary to introduce you to those two. So it made a lot of sense for us to collaborate with the computational linguists, since some of them already contributed to projects in the arts and humanities digital projects. And in Belgium, we had DARIAH-VL as the Belgian contribution to DARIAH-EU, but we also had the Institute of the Dutch Language, or Dutch Language Institute, which was the Flemish contribution to the CLARIAH infrastructure at the European level. This has changed, and I will quickly come back to that in 2 slides. So next slide, please, Johan. So we decided to combine the strengths. We grew together more recently during the last years, and we actually developed or we combined our forces to write a proposal to also receive funding from the Flemish government. The Flemish funding agency decided first, and you can already go over to the next slide, Johan, decided to give us a kind of startup funding so that we could look at how we would join our strengths and join our forces. And then since this year onwards, we have received a more permanent funding, at least for the next 4 years, to actually develop tools and services combined with the computational linguists. So next slide, Johan. Before I go over to the key infrastructural challenges that we aim to address, I should also state that since September of this year, our colleagues from CLARIAH Flanders have transformed themselves into CLARIAH-VL. So that's also the new contribution of the Belgian computational linguists to the European infrastructure, and they have now also been formally recognized in our country. Okay, so then the key infrastructural challenges that we aim to address, you can go back to the previous slide, Johan. So the first one is that we want to provide more data level access to some key Belgian digitized and also born digital researchers. And we want to do that, of course, as fair open science data sets. And Julie, in the next presentation, will already introduce you to one of these, namely the data.kbr platform. The second one is a linked open data ecosystem for the humanities. There have already been many attempts in the past, and also there have been developed some very good tools and services already, but we aim to combine them to also connect them and to bring them together in one landing platform. Next slide, please, Johan. A third challenge is, of course, the rise of artificial intelligence in the recent years. And that is also a challenge that we'd like to address. Also, our colleagues from CLARIAH have already done some pilots on using AI in computational linguistics research, but that's also one of the infrastructural challenges that we will address. And of course, we want to stress the essential role of digital research infrastructures. So we are also, as Johan already mentioned in his introduction, a consortium that wants to exchange knowledge within Flanders, but also beyond. And that hopefully can also stimulate the long-term preservation and sustainability, not only of the platform, but also of the expertise we have. Next slide, please. So these are just some numbers of how large our consortium is. So we have the 4 main Flemish universities that are Ghent, Antwerp, Brussels, the Dutch-speaking university at Brussels, and KU Leuven, where I work and where I serve as the coordinator of CLARIAH Flanders and DARIAH Belgium. And then we have lots of partners, which I'm not going to mention all during this brief introduction. So you can go to the next slide, Johan. What we already developed during the previous phases were 9 services that are currently operational. Some of them were developed within the CLARIAH framework, others within the DARIAH framework. Some also just were contributions, for example, the development of some node code features, a database platform, the Trismegistos data services platform for ancient historians, but also in the fields of text analysis, geospatial analysis, and so on. You can find them on the CLARIAH website as well. Next slide, please, Johan. But then also we are intending the next 4 years to develop 6 new services, and they are structured according to the research data lifecycle. So we have aggregation, but also enrichment, visualization, analysis, and so on. And next slide, Johan, will give a more visual representation of how that will look like. The services itself are also still in the development phase, in the beta phase, as you could say, but they all have in common that they will, from its beginning already, involve specific projects, so that we can receive immediate feedback and that we will develop these services and tools from a user-centered perspective. And then I want to end this very short presentation, this introduction to CLARIAH Flanders, with the role we also intend to play in the development of the European Open Science Cloud. So even during the previous phases within DARIAH, we always contributed these tools and services as open access data sets, if there were data sets, or open source tools, if they were developed as tools. And we, of course, intend to continue walking this road also with the vision of the development of the European Open Science Clouds. So I hope this was in a nutshell what we intend to do with CLARIAH Flanders. And of course, you can find more detailed information on our hypotheses blog, which we also hope to develop further during the next coming years. Thank you. Johan, you're still muted, I guess.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. I think you just also did the introduction for Julie. So I give the word to Julie regarding the KBR virtual lab.
Great, thank you. Oh, it says someone has to stop sharing. That's you, Johan, and then I can share my screen. Okay, thank you. Okay. Give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen then. Just says EHRI 2021. Yep, great, thanks. Thank you, yes, so I'm Julie Berkholz. I'm head of Kabir, the Royal Library of Belgium's Digital Research Lab. That's a laboratory to facilitate text and data mining on our collections. I'm also Assistant Professor of Digital Humanities at the Ghent Center for Digital Humanities, Department of History, Ghent University, Belgium. So indeed, to make it even more complicated from the story that Tom told about all of these overlaps in our DH work and how we're involved in DARIAH, I indeed have 2 separate roles, but what I'm presenting today is specifically a Kabir project. So if we speak about it in the DARIAH sense, then a DARIAH federal level project, which is a proposal which we have not yet formally received confirmation that it will be funded. But regardless, if it's not, it will get worked in to a future proposal within the BELSPO, the Federal Science Office of Belgium's EHRI 2021 call. So this was a call that's aimed to support the research infrastructures, all of them from environmental to health to social and cultural innovation. This proposal is specifically connected to DARIAH, which is why I'm presenting it here. And it's a proposal for Kabir's virtual lab. This was prepared with Sally Chambers, which I'm sure many of you know, also working at Kabir on a Data Kabir research project and Kabir's ICT department. For those of you that are not familiar, Kabir is the National Scientific Library of Belgium, and we have a legal mandate to collect all Belgian publications. So as the institution, we preserve and manage and also do research on theoretically 8 million documents that we have available to us. So this is a cultural and historical heritage, but also a scientific library. So we're maintaining lots of materials and data, not only the analog or these source documents, but also digital versions of these, born digital objects, metadata on these objects, etc. When I speak about data, I want it to be clear for what we mean by this. And at this moment, what I really mean is in the virtual lab, when we're talking about data, we're talking about information that's in a format that a computer can read. So simply machine readable data. And at Kabir, we of course have many different types of data, and they're also maintained in many different ways. Not only are they characteristically different, but they're also maintained by different departments, different stakeholders, and also physically stored in many different places, accessible in many different ways, from APIs to needing someone to really manually by hand make copies of things. So there's lots of different priorities, challenges, and opportunities. Within a digital data strategy that we're developing at Kabir, we have itemized this data and detailed what these different data types are. So when we're speaking about data, we can be speaking about bibliographical data, authority data, digital data, collections as data, born digital data, e-publications, research data, and even increasingly lab data or code. So things that we're developing around the collections as data or around the use of this data. So it's extremely diverse, and thus the challenge here is that how can we make these collections accessible? So not only number one, how can we make it, let's say, more user-friendly, but also optimize a workflow so that internal and external researchers can make use of this data in a data in demand service. And so we're working on a shift of providing these collections as machine readable format, and that demands us some new practices and a new infrastructure. So the Kabir Virtual Lab is the proposal of a development of an infrastructure to supply data to users in a data in demand service. We're specifically thinking here of working as collections as data. So that's information related to these materials. So if you think about a historical newspaper, we have the original copy of the historical newspaper. We also have a digital scanned copy as a PDF or as a JPEG, or we also have the metadata about that. We also have alto files about that. We also, in some cases, which is available on Belgium, press and periodicals, also have a full text searchable. So you're able to search for words within that full text of a historical newspaper, but we don't yet make that the full text available to researchers, even though we might have it available on our servers. And that's because we don't have a workflow and an infrastructure developed to do that. How does this making then these collections as data available, how is that related to DARIAH? Well, it's related to DARIAH because key to thinking about making these collections as available, one thing is developing an infrastructure internally. Second to that is how can we ensure under Belgian copyright law, which the previous presentation was a good example of, who can make use of this, of these materials and of this data. So there are different regulations around what researchers can use than what the public can use in and out of copyright. So core to this workflow is an authentication and authoritization workflow where we connect with the DARIAH shibboleth AAI, which would mean that any DARIAH researcher, so any researcher affiliated to a research institution, but also independent researchers that have authority from DARIAH and are recognized as a researcher to access that system, can enter with, let's say, their university affiliation, log in to the Kabir Virtual Lab, and that they would have the same exact access and authority to requesting this data on demand that's available. So that's a really core important link, that authorization, but also, of course, it's a contribution to what Tom has spoke about, of ensuring that Kabir's cultural heritage data is available for researchers, not only as unique data sets that perhaps we already pre-curate, but that a researcher can go in and make selections of the available data. I don't think I have to explain to you kind of what our user base are, but just to make that clear about the stakeholders within DARIAH. So not only thinking about the universities themselves and the partner institutions, but DARIAH-EU has estimated over 500,000, let's say, users in research policy and cultural heritage that they serve. And this would be the same. Making that link and ensuring that they can have access is key to providing those researchers access throughout the EU. I'm going to skip that one. So I just want to get into, I'm going to go over this part. This is a bit more specific about the virtual lab, but it's about that access part. Currently at Kabir, you can access our collections through a My Kabir login. This would change the way that users can access this. And we're working with Belnet as a subcontractor to help us extend these authority and authorization services so that it's not only needing the Belgian ID to have a My Kabir login, but also extend those services. This is also really important, not only internally for making this data on demand service, but bringing together internally all of these APIs. So right now we've really been thinking in a collection mindset about making collections accessible. And this is a kind of an umbrella approach, which says, yep, we have these APIs, we have these endpoints, we know that this metadata is searchable. Let's figure out ways to merge these APIs so that we can do this through one central search platform or through one API. So it's compiling things and also changing the way that users can make requests about getting Kabir's data. Currently, this is done manually. So it's done on a request basis where depending the department, either ICT or collection managers have to manually put together these digital copies or digital information. So that's changing it to automizing this process. Let's see. Has this ever been done before? I think that's important. So this would, of course, we see an increasing amount of data labs popping up throughout Europe. The BNF Data Lab, which is launched a few weeks ago, the National Library of Scotland's Data Foundry, Europeana also experimenting with different data sets. The only other place that we know that it's done, and so if you know of other initiatives, please let me know because I want to reach out to them, is the Royal Library of Denmark, where they have a research access to their collections. So this virtual lab would work to extend these European data agreements and understanding the Belgian context about what we can make available, how we can make it available to researchers outside of Belgium and organizations outside of Belgium, and specifically, of course, to DARIAH. So this would be the second, let's say, experiment of this virtual lab. Of course, we ensure the reusability of this because although we're experimenting on setting up this virtual lab, everything will be documented about this process and shared in Orfeo, which is a perhaps also SODA, I should mention if we're speaking about research data, but that's detailed in the work package, in the working packages, and we're using international standards and APIs so that hopefully when we develop a workflow, it's also something that can easily be replicated by following this documentation. But of course, it's unique to the institution, the way that we have made available data, the way that it's technically set up will be distinct per institution, but there's certainly, we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel in thinking about how to give access to these collections. In addition, once a query has been made, we'll consider the licensing of that, and we'll also make it available through our future data portal where there will be pre-curated collections on datakabir.be, where you can also have access then to someone's request. In conclusion, then, we hope that the virtual lab will serve to, of course, develop this data on demand service, but also document these practices that are necessary for making data available to researchers, not only within Belgium, but cultural heritage institutions more widely in a data on demand service, extending the way and also changing the way that we can make cultural heritage data accessible for researchers. Thanks for your attention, and I already see some questions in the chat, so I'll look at them now.
Okay, I just got a question from Francesca. So these were all Belgian. Thank you, Julie. I took the word. Thank you for the presentation. And I will continue on that. So these were Belgian examples of projects, but in fact, we are also linked to other international research infrastructure. So we saw one aspect of our working group. All other national initiatives from other projects are certainly welcome. Now we have also a link to the second presentation from Herminio and Doreen are on the link with the international research infrastructures. Last year we had a presentation with APE. Now we go back to the beginning and we have two presentations of the European Holocaust infrastructures. So
I think there was
Doreen?
also a question from Mike to Julie, I think, before my question.
Yes, I see that. Yes, Kabir has a data on demand service. I will put the link in the chat. And you can just request which items, so find them from the catalog, itemize them there, and then you'll get a quote back about what the cost would be for digitization and OCR. So that's not necessarily, it depends. There's a pricing depending upon if it's already been digitized, if it's available, and how we have it available. So I'll put that in the chat in a moment.
Thank you, Julie. Doreen?
Yep. Let me see if I can share my screen. Share. Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, great, thank you. I see that we don't have that much time, so I will keep it short and I will give the honors to my colleague Herminio. My name is Doreen Stuyven. I work as an archivist at Kazerne Dossij in Mechelen, but I also represent our institute within the European Holocaust Research Infrastructure, better known as EHRI. As Johanna has explained, it's an international consortium. We're currently preparing everything to become a permanent EHRI. So I've just prepared some slides to introduce you to the concept of what EHRI is, why does EHRI exist, and what do we want to do, and then Herminio can take over and tell you more about how we gather, structure, and disseminate our data. Just to give you an idea, EHRI was created from a sense of necessity in the way that Holocaust resources are spread out very all over the world, and that this can be a challenge for researchers. So to improve Holocaust studies and Holocaust research, the idea arose to create a digital platform in the first step to gather and disseminate data. Why? Because Holocaust is an essential part of international history, and to maintain its social relevance, it was necessary to create a transnational and interdisciplinary approach, and all the tools developed by EHRI will contribute to this mission. So as you can see, EHRI has multiple goals. So we want to give access to descriptions, not the collections themselves, but to descriptions. So researchers and other users can use data in preparation of their research and their research trips. But we also want to bring together expert groups, as well as give trainings to those in need of the expertise to use these sources. At the moment, we are quite an elaborate network. We have a mobile lab on which Armenia will elaborate. This mobile lab and members of the consortium have so far identified 2,204 archival institutions, mainly in Europe, but there are also institutions in the United States, Israel, the Middle East, Shanghai, that have relevant data for everybody who wants to research the Holocaust. So we visited 60 countries so far, and there are about 320,000 collection descriptions in the portal site that EHRI has created. The data that has been inputted, and we will also elaborate on how we connect the institutes with the descriptions in the EHRI portal. EHRI has been around since 2010. We have gone through several phases from EHRI 1 via EHRI 2 to EHRI 3, which is now in preparation in parallel to EHRI PP, the preparatory phase in which we want to create a permanent research infrastructure, or ERIC. In its three phases of its life cycle, EHRI has developed several tools. For the data management aspect, the online portal is the most important one, for which we also provide online training. But we do have a document block where data regarding, so metadata regarding collections is being described, but on an accessible level, which means that case studies are being worked on and published there. The same goes for the digital editions. We have fellowships and training programs, as well as workshops and conferences. So for the future, we are working on creating the ERIC, as I said. This will be a permanent structure, and of course you all know that for this type of structures, we need an administrative and a managerial context, which consists of a central hub, scientific advisory board, necessary data management plans, etc. But the main goal of the permanent ERIC will be to maintain the collaboration and exchange opportunities that already exist. For the data, the operational aspects of the consortium, we will focus more on, in the future, more on how we can broaden the functionalities of the tools that we already have developed for data maintenance as well as dispersion. So for example, we're now looking into how to connect collections on a thematic level. How can we implement GIS techniques? How can we exchange data between institutes as well as between the portal website and the institute websites themselves? And also, how can we broaden our collaboration network in Europe and in the world? From that aspect, a very important element of the work done by EHRI is the mobile lab, for which my colleague Erminio is responsible. So I will let him elaborate more on the details of the EHRI mobile lab. Erminio?
Hi, I will share my screen. Okay. Can you see the screen? Yeah, okay. So let me move this. Okay. So I will be presenting the EHRI Mobile Data Integration Lab. So what it is, what it solves, and which the challenges are. Okay, so as Doreen explained, the European Holocaust Research Infrastructure, EHRI, is a transnational Holocaust research, commemoration, and education. And what we want is that we have the wide dispersal of sources and expertise across many institutions. So we are connecting sources, institutions, and people. Okay, I'm not going to go into deep detail into this slide, as Doreen already presented. This is the EHRI timeline that Doreen has already explained quite good. So I will go directly to the EHRI mobile data integration lab. So how data integration is done in the EHRI portal. So the EHRI portal data model is based in EAD2, and we have EAD3 under testing. So it is possible to map from non-EAD conformant XML files to EAD2 through the ECT software, which is based on XQuery. And it's also possible to run arbitrary conversions. So we can use XML style sheets to convert from arbitrary XML files to EAD2. So the conclusion is that all data integration in the EHRI portal is based in XML technologies. So this is an example of the ECT software. So we have the target path and the target node. So we can build the three structures of an EAD file. And then we have the source node and the value to extract the values from the input XML files. This is an example for the Caserne-Dosan build bank. So this is the actual transformation that we are using to put the metadata of the Caserne-Dosan in the EHRI portal. So the good thing of this tool is that this is a more approachable and organized way of doing the data mapping than using XQuery scripts, but it's still too complex for non-expert users. Then for the data harvesting in the EHRI portal, we support three different ways of harvesting the data. So we have the OAI PMH, which is the preferred option because it's a standard. It is straightforward. Only in some cases we need to do little transformations. So it is indeed a very sustainable connection with our partner institutions. But this is not possible with all the institutions because it requires quite technological requirements from the institutions. Then we also support the resource sync, which is a lightweight alternative for OAI PMH, but it requires the deliberate update on the origin side. So we can say that it is less sustainable. And it is the problem is that the resources are not always following EAD, so we have to do these transformations. And then we have a third option that is the file upload, so we can get a folder and upload to the EHRI portal. So it's easier for the institutions because they only have to send some files, but as we can imagine, it is not sustainable because we have to do the manual update of the sources. So after all, what's the data panorama of GLAM institutions in the EHRI project? So we have different perspectives. For the most technological institutions, they have support for EAD, for this standard OAI PMH. We have vocabularies and thesaurus, and they also have the support of an IT department. But this is like heaven on earth, but this is only for a very minority of the institutions that we are dealing with. Then we have the medium technological institutions. So in this case, we have databases, which normally have a dedicated software on top, normally a private software. And they normally offer some exports in some XML format through an API. So with the ECT software that we have seen, it is possible to do the data mapping and to ingest the data in the EHRI portal. Then we have low technological institutions that normally use Excel sheets or some other similar thing. So here we have to do a more complicated things. And then we have very low technological institutions that use PDF or Word files. So this is kind of very difficult to extract the data from these kind of files. And this is like I put here with this map, is like the five-star models of linked open data, which is very related to this panorama. So after all this, what is the EHRI Mobile Data Integration Lab? So in EHRI, we have institutions, organizations, and archives that want to integrate their data into the portal. But the problem is that they don't know how. because we have a high learning curve to use these kind of tools. And in some cases, IT knowledge is required for doing this. So the mission of the Data Integration Lab is to help users with the integration, or even do the integration for them if it is needed. Another goal is to build more sustainable connections, and also to allow institutions to go farther in their technological stack, just giving support to them or helping them in going further. And why the EHRI Mobile Data Integration Lab? So doing the mapping seems easy. We have seen this Excel file that we can do with the ECT, do the data mappings from an input in XML to EAD. But in the end, it is not that easy. So it is time consuming. It implies try and error, and tools are very in the low level. So the abstraction level is very low, and non-expert users find it very difficult to use. And we have this mobile between parentheses, because we can also go in situ if it is necessary to help them to do the actual data integration. And we have some cases, like for example, the mentioned Excel file, that are totally out of the scope of the tools that we have available. So let's see an example of that. So I received this Excel file with different data, different descriptions from Czech institutions. So the problem is that we don't have tools for this. So we ran different experiments to see the better workflow. So I use OpenRefine to do the data mapping. And I was able to build these EAD files from this Excel file. So with these EAD files, we were able to ingest the data in the EHRI portal. So this is the kind of things that the EHRI Mobile Data Integration Lab is supposed to do. The good thing is that we are able to create the EADs and ingest them in the EHRI portal, but this workflow is very error prone and unsustainable in time. So just a bit remark on computer science theory. We have to make the distinctions between data integration and data exchange. We can define data exchange as getting one origin format and transformed to another format, which we can see that as a subset of data integration. But when we are talking about data integration, we have very different schemas and we want to map them through a single schema. So the idea in the end is that users can use different data in different schemas through a single interface, no matter the different schemas that we are dealing with. So for that, we also need the same semantics. So we need same vocabularies, thesaurus, and etc. And that in the end happens in using standards. So now let's see some challenges and future lines for the EHRI Data Integration Lab. So the first thing is to improve data integration techniques and workflows. So the idea is to lower down the complexity barrier. So we need to let users do more on their own, and also to improve their productivity so they can do more in less time. So we can build on top of my own experiences, where I developed a language that was that enabled users to do the data mapping in an easier way. And sustainable connections are inevitably connected to support users and let them do more in an easier way. So if we want to do more sustainable connections, we need to take care of the users. So a second challenge is to support more heterogeneous formats, because as I said, nowadays we only support EAD as the main data model of the EHRI portal, because we need to open up to a wider non-standard world. because standards are the desired goal, but sometimes they do not cover all the use cases. And in the real world, we have many heterogeneous different data models, and the diversity is the default. So we need to embrace this heterogeneity instead of fighting against it. And the third challenge is to increase the interoperability with other aggregators and with the original data providers, because doing different aggregators is just a bigger way of doing information silos. So for that, we can use link open data, so we can link to the source and link between different data aggregators, because data integration is also about connecting the different silos. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Herminio and Doreen. This is, it's quite interesting, and for example, a result of this workshop is that at this moment users of Archives Portal Europe are using the tools built by EHRI. So this is what we are trying to do, and also keep information rolling between us. I think there is also a question, Herminio, about the vocabularies and the thesaurus.
Yeah, we have some thesaurus built in the EHRI portal. So we have for camps, ghettos, and all this. So the idea of this thesaurus is just to support multilingual search in the EHRI portal, so we can search in any language and get the different material that is mentioned in these things. So I will put a link to these different thesaurus and vocabularies, so you can take a look to that.
Thank you. I see we have left a few minutes. I think we go to the questions. So as you see, we are our working group is built on running projects and opportunities. We for the future we want to attract new interesting partners and projects. We want also to improve our internal collaboration with DARIAH and with other working groups. For this, we think also looking to geo-humanities, ELDA, the Research Data Management Working Group. We are looking for synergies with other European infrastructures. And for this, we are also working on the DARIAH team call of this year, where we wanted to do. We started in 2017-18 with Trust and Understanding. There is a lot of new work to be done, so we want to file, in fact, a second version of it, and reviewing the results of the first and building further on what we did with the integration of new opportunities and technologies. So this in a nutshell, what are the short plans? Are there questions? Please, I stopped share my screen. Okay. So I leave the word to you all. If there are questions, remarks, if you want to join, please send us a mail. Please tell it now.
I see that Mike Pretty has raised his hand, his virtual hand.
Mike?
Hi there. It's been a while since I've been involved in this group. So I'm kind of interested in some of the more slightly interesting areas, which was just brought up at the end of that last presentation, which is on the areas of thesauri and controlled vocabularies. I think that could be quite an interesting area for this group to perhaps to also take a look at, because there seems to be a fair bit going on around this area at the moment in different projects, both at EOSC level all the way down to individual institutions even. So I was wondering whether that would be a topic worth covering in future meetings, future discussions, just to take it off. Maybe it takes it off slightly off the center, but I still think it's very important with the long-term sustainability of at least the descriptions of materials. Anybody got any thoughts?
Thank you, Mike. I think you just made a very good point. You see, the colleagues of the KBR are busy with it. We were working on a RIC prototype in collaboration with Archives Portal, and it will be used also as a test case for Archives Portal Europe. You see around within our networks, many initiatives are there. So I think it's an ideal thing to tackle this subject by the working group and to make some synergies, because else we have different projects which are competing with each other on certain points or go in a different direction. So it could be useful certainly to make it as a very important subject, to see what all these projects can lay together and how we can further with as a coherent group of people working together. So thank you.
May I ask one other more direct question? There's an intern student with us who is also very interested in RIC at the moment. Can I point her in your direction?
Certainly.
Thank you.
So,
and I have a more, Francesca here. I have a more, just out of my curiosity, are you planning to, DARIAH has just launched the working group funding for 2021, 2023. These are supporting small projects for DARIAH working groups. Are you planning to apply, Johan, Tom, and Doreen?
Yes, definitely. That was the thing that Johan mentioned on his last slide with the DARIAH team of, so I don't know if it's still called the team call, but we have already looked into it and we are currently working on submitting, hopefully just before the deadline.
Perfect. Yeah, I will send out information about information session that I'll be holding next week, probably. So if you have any question, you can attend.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you, Francesca.
And certainly because we are also thinking on a second version of a build upon the first version of trust and understanding. So if there are people with related projects, so we are one of the main goals is bringing us all together within these all the projects together within these teams. So please feel free to send us a mail also, and then we can work together on a program. So we had a concrete question from EHRI, and please contact us. Then we can certainly talk about possible program speakers and things we can do. Thank you.
Okay. So it's 2 minutes to 12. So do you think you can?
Julie? Okay.
If there are no further questions, I think we can close the meeting right on time. So also thank you, Francesca, for leading us and for maintaining the Zoom infrastructure, which was very helpful for us.
I just press a couple of buttons, but thanks a lot. Thanks to you. It was a really interesting meeting, and So for the new participants that are not part of this working group yet, maybe if you want to contact Johan, Tom, and Doreen. So the information, I think I shared them with you already, but the contact information on the working group page.
And I think there is also a link to the Hypotheses blog there, where you can also find our contact addresses.
Yeah, correct. So you can find the contact here. And other than that, thanks a lot. Have a nice rest of the day. And yeah, let's keep in touch then.
Yeah, and hopefully see each other in Greece, was it next year?
Yes, Greece 2022.
Okay. Thank you, Francesca.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.